Maria Santos had always believed that some people were born to stand in the spotlight, while others were meant to work quietly in the shadows. At 52 years old, she had spent most of her life proving this theory correct. Every morning, she would wake up at 5:30, prepare breakfast for her family, and then head to her job as a hospital cleaner at St. Mary's Medical Center. Her uniform was always perfectly pressed, her smile genuine, and her work ethic unmatched. The other staff members at the hospital knew Maria well. She was the woman who would stay late to help new nurses find supplies, who remembered everyone's birthday, and who somehow managed to keep the pediatric ward spotless while still finding time to read stories to sick children. The doctors respected her, the nurses appreciated her, but few people really knew her story. Maria had immigrated to America 25 years earlier with nothing but a suitcase and a dream of providing better opportunities for her children. She spoke broken English then, but she was determined to learn. While working multiple jobs during the day, she would attend night classes at the community college, slowly improving her language skills and earning her high school equivalency diploma. When the hospital announced they were looking for volunteers to help with their new community outreach program, Maria was one of the first to sign up. The program aimed to provide medical assistance and education to underserved neighborhoods, particularly focusing on immigrant communities who often avoided seeking medical help due to language barriers or fear. Maria's supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, was a stern woman who had worked at the hospital for over 30 years. She had always been professional with Maria, but there was an underlying tone that suggested she saw the cleaning staff as somehow less important than the medical professionals. When Maria expressed interest in joining the outreach program, Mrs. Henderson's reaction was less than encouraging. "Maria, I appreciate your enthusiasm," Mrs. Henderson said, barely looking up from her paperwork. "But this program requires people who can communicate effectively with community leaders and represent the hospital professionally. Perhaps you should focus on your current responsibilities instead." The rejection stung, but Maria was used to being overlooked. She had faced similar dismissals throughout her life, whenever she tried to step beyond what others expected of her. But something inside her refused to give up. She began attending the community meetings on her own time, translating for Spanish-speaking families who needed medical assistance, and building relationships with local community leaders. Dr. Patricia Williams, the head of the outreach program, began noticing Maria's presence at these meetings. She watched as Maria effortlessly switched between English and Spanish, helping families understand medical procedures and connecting them with appropriate services. Dr. Williams was impressed by Maria's natural ability to put people at ease and her deep understanding of the community's needs. Despite her growing involvement in the community work, Maria continued to face resistance from hospital administration. When she suggested organizing health education seminars in Spanish, she was told that the hospital didn't have resources for such initiatives. When she offered to help translate medical documents, she was informed that they needed certified translators only. Maria's children, Rosa and Miguel, now adults with families of their own, often encouraged their mother to pursue her passion for community service more actively. They had watched her sacrifice her own dreams for years to ensure they had opportunities she never had. Rosa, now a teacher, and Miguel, a social worker, understood the impact their mother could have if given the chance. The turning point came during a particularly busy evening shift. Maria was cleaning the emergency room when a young pregnant woman was brought in, clearly in distress and speaking only Spanish. The medical staff was struggling to communicate with her, and the official translator wasn't available. Without hesitation, Maria stepped in to help, quickly translating the woman's symptoms and medical history to the attending physician. The woman was experiencing complications with her pregnancy and needed immediate attention. Thanks to Maria's quick thinking and translation skills, the medical team was able to provide the necessary treatment, potentially saving both mother and baby. Dr. Williams witnessed this incident and realized that the hospital was wasting Maria's talents by limiting her to cleaning duties. However, when Dr. Williams approached Mrs. Henderson about involving Maria more formally in patient care translation services, she was met with the same resistance. "We have protocols to follow," Mrs. Henderson insisted, Maria is not qualified for patient interaction beyond her current duties. Maria felt the familiar sting of rejection, but this time it felt different. She had proven her value, saved lives even, yet she was still being pushed back into the shadows. She began to wonder if she would ever be seen as more than just the quiet cleaning lady who worked hard and caused no trouble. Little did Maria know that her years of dedicated service, her selfless volunteer work, and her natural ability to connect with people had not gone completely unnoticed. There were people in positions of influence who had been watching her work, documenting her contributions, and preparing to ensure that her efforts would finally receive the recognition they deserved. As Maria continued her daily routine, scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins, she had no idea that her name was already being discussed in boardrooms and community meetings throughout the city. The humble woman who had been sent away from the firing line was about to discover that sometimes the most powerful recognition comes from the most unexpected places. 3 months after the incident in the emergency room, Maria's routine was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Father Miguel Rodriguez from St. Anthony's Church had come to the hospital specifically to find her. Maria was surprised when she was called to the main lobby during her shift, even more surprised to see the respected priest waiting for her with a warm smile. "Maria Santos," Father Rodriguez said, extending his hand. "I've been hearing wonderful things about your work in our community. I wonder if we could talk for a few minutes." Maria glanced nervously at the clock, worried about leaving her duties. But Father Rodriguez had already spoken with her supervisor. They found a quiet corner in the hospital cafeteria, where the priest explained that several community leaders had been discussing Maria's contributions to their neighborhood health initiatives. "You may not realize this," Father Rodriguez said, "but your work has touched dozens of families in our parish. The Gonzalez family still talks about how you helped them navigate their son's diabetes diagnosis. Mrs. Chen credits you with saving her life when you convinced her to seek treatment for her chest pains." Maria listened with growing amazement as Father Rodriguez recounted story after story of people she had helped over the past few years. She had never thought of her actions as particularly significant, just as doing what any decent person would do when they saw someone in need. The priest leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "Maria, our community has been selected to receive a federal grant for a comprehensive health and wellness center. We need someone to coordinate community outreach and serve as a liaison between the medical professionals and our residents. The position would be full-time, with benefits, and a salary that reflects the importance of this work." Maria's heart began to race. This was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of for years but had never dared to hope for. "Father, I'm honored that you would think of me, but I don't have the formal qualifications. I'm just a cleaning lady." "You're not just anything, Maria," Father Rodriguez replied firmly. "You have something that can't be taught in universities. You have the trust of this community, the language skills we need, and the heart to truly care about making a difference." When Maria returned to work that afternoon, she was walking on clouds. For the first time in years, she felt like someone truly saw her potential. But her excitement was short-lived when she mentioned the opportunity to Mrs. Henderson during their weekly staff meeting. "Maria, I think you're being unrealistic," Mrs. Henderson said, her tone condescending. "Community liaison positions require extensive administrative experience and formal medical training. You've been a wonderful cleaning staff member, but that doesn't qualify you for professional healthcare roles," Mrs. Henderson continued, explaining that if Maria left her current position for this unrealistic venture, there would be no guarantee that her job at the hospital would be available if things didn't work out. The implication was clear: stay in your lane or risk losing everything. That evening, Maria sat at her kitchen table with Rosa and Miguel, sharing both the exciting opportunity and Mrs. Henderson's discouraging words. Her children were frustrated by their mother's treatment at the hospital, but they also understood her fears about taking such a big risk. "Mama," Rosa said, reaching across the table to hold her mother's hand, "you've spent your whole life playing it safe, putting everyone else's needs first. Maybe it's time to bet on yourself." Miguel nodded in agreement. "You've been preparing for this opportunity your whole life, even if you didn't realize it. All Those night classes, all that volunteer work, all the relationships you've built in the community. This isn't luck, Mama. This is earned. Over the next week, Maria found herself torn between excitement and anxiety. She would catch herself daydreaming about the new position while mopping floors, imagining how she could help expand health services in her community. But then Mrs. Henderson's warnings would creep back into her thoughts, reminding her of all the ways she might fail. The decision became even more complicated when Dr. Williams approached her with a different proposition. The hospital had finally approved a part-time translator position, specifically created with Maria in mind. It would mean a small pay increase and the chance to do more meaningful work, but still within the familiar walls of St. Mary's Medical Center. "It's a good compromise, Maria," Dr. Williams explained. "You'd be helping patients directly using your language skills and cultural knowledge, and you'd have job security here." Maria appreciated Dr. Williams' support, but she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting the translator position would be settling for less than her full potential. She had spent so many years being grateful for small acknowledgments of her worth that she had almost forgotten how to dream bigger. The community center opportunity represented something different. It was a chance to be a leader, to shape programs and policies that could impact hundreds of families. It was also terrifying because it meant stepping completely out of her comfort zone and risking failure in a very public way. As Maria weighed her options, she began to notice small signs of support from unexpected places. Nurses who had worked with her for years started sharing stories about times when Maria had gone above and beyond her duties. Dr. Peterson, a surgeon who rarely spoke to support staff, stopped her in the hallway to thank her for the compassionate care she had shown his patients' families over the years. These moments of recognition gave Maria a new perspective on her years at the hospital. She began to realize that while Mrs. Henderson might not have seen her value, many others had noticed and appreciated her contributions. The question was whether Maria had the courage to see herself the way others saw her. The deadline for accepting the community liaison position was approaching, and Maria knew she had to make a decision. As she prepared for what might be her last week as a hospital cleaning lady, she had no idea that forces were already in motion that would make her choice much clearer and would reveal just how much impact her quiet years of service had truly made. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday. Maria arrived at the hospital at 6:30, changed into her uniform, and began her rounds on the 3rd floor. She had made her decision about the community liaison position the night before, finally choosing to take the leap of faith that her children had encouraged. She planned to submit her resignation letter to Mrs. Henderson that afternoon. As she worked, Maria found herself taking mental photographs of the familiar hallways and rooms. Despite the frustrations and lack of recognition, St. Mary's had been her second home for 15 years. She knew every corner, every squeaky wheel on the supply carts, every nurse's coffee preference. Leaving would be harder than she had anticipated. Around 10 o'clock, unusual activity in the main lobby caught her attention. Hospital administrators were bustling about, setting up displays and arranging chairs in the main conference room. Maria noticed several people in expensive suits carrying cameras and notebooks. Whatever was happening, it seemed important. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the hospital's chief administrator, was directing the setup with barely contained excitement. Maria had only spoken to Dr. Mitchell once or twice in all her years at the hospital, usually just polite nods in passing. The chief administrator worked on a different level entirely, dealing with board members, major donors, and city officials. "Excuse me," Maria said to Jenny, one of the newer nurses who was watching the activity. "Do you know what's going on downstairs?" Jenny shrugged. "Something about an award ceremony or recognition event. I heard they're honoring community health advocates or something like that. Mrs. Henderson was asking all departments to send a representative to attend." Maria felt a little sad that she would miss what sounded like an inspiring event. She had always admired people who received recognition for their community service work. Maybe someday in her new position, she might be worthy of such acknowledgement. At noon, the hospital's intercom system crackled to life with an announcement from Dr. Mitchell. "All staff members are invited to join us in the main conference room. for a special recognition ceremony, honoring outstanding community health advocates. Light refreshments will be served. Maria debated whether to attend. She still had work to finish, and she felt awkward at formal hospital events where she was usually invisible among the medical staff. But curiosity won out, and she decided to stand in the back of the room for a few minutes. The conference room was packed with hospital staff, community leaders, local politicians, and several people Maria didn't recognize who looked like reporters or photographers. At the front of the room stood an impressive display board covered with photos and documents, though Maria couldn't see the details from where she stood near the back. Dr. Mitchell stepped up to the podium, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. Today we gather to celebrate individuals who embody the true spirit of community healthcare. These are people who have worked tirelessly, often without recognition, to bridge gaps in our healthcare system and serve our most vulnerable populations. Maria found herself genuinely interested in hearing about these community heroes. She had always believed that the most important work happened quietly, away from spotlights and ceremonies. Our first honoree, Dr. Mitchell continued, has been nominated by multiple community organizations, medical professionals, and the families she has served. Over the past decade, this individual has volunteered countless hours translating for non-English speaking patients, has organized informal health education sessions in her neighborhood, and has served as an unofficial liaison between our hospital and the Latino community. Maria felt a flutter of recognition. This description sounded remarkably similar to her own volunteer activities, but she quickly dismissed the thought. Surely there were many people doing similar work throughout the city. Dr. Mitchell looked directly toward the back of the room as she continued. This year's Community Health Advocate Award recipient has touched the lives of over 200 families, has been instrumental in connecting dozens of people with life-saving medical care, and has done all of this while maintaining full-time employment and raising her own family. The flutter in Maria's chest grew stronger. The numbers Dr. Mitchell mentioned seemed impossibly high, but as Maria thought back over the years of small acts of kindness and assistance, she began to wonder if they could have added up to something significant. This remarkable woman has been described by Dr. Patricia Williams as the heart of our community outreach efforts, by Father Miguel Rodriguez as an angel walking among us, and by countless patients as the person who saved my life. Maria's hands began to tremble. Those were people she knew, people she had worked with, but this couldn't possibly be about her. She was just a cleaning lady who helped out when she could. Dr. Mitchell smiled broadly as she looked toward the back of the room again. It gives me tremendous pleasure to announce that this year's Community Health Advocate Award goes to Maria Santos, whose selfless dedication to her community exemplifies the very best of healthcare service. The room erupted in applause, but Maria felt frozen in place. This had to be a mistake. There must be another Maria Santos somewhere in the city who deserved this recognition. People were turning to look at her, clapping and smiling, but Maria couldn't move. Mrs. Henderson appeared at her side, her expression unreadable. "Maria," she said quietly, "they're calling for you." Dr. Mitchell was still speaking into the microphone. "Maria, would you please join us at the front? We have some people here who would very much like to thank you personally." As Maria slowly made her way through the crowd, she felt like she was walking through a dream. The faces around her were familiar, colleagues she had worked alongside for years, but their expressions were different now. Instead of polite acknowledgement or casual indifference, she saw respect, admiration, and genuine warmth. When she reached the front of the room, Dr. Mitchell handed her the microphone with an encouraging smile. "Maria, we'd love to hear from you. How does it feel to finally receive the recognition you deserve?" Maria stared at the microphone in her hands, then looked out at the room full of people who were waiting to hear what she had to say. For the first time in her life, Maria Santos was standing in the spotlight, and everyone was listening. Maria stood at the podium, holding the microphone with shaking hands, looking out at a sea of expectant faces. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few seconds. Her mind was racing, trying to process this impossible moment. "I think there's been a mistake," Maria finally said, her voice barely audible even with the microphone. A gentle wave of laughter rippled through the room. not mocking but understanding, as if everyone recognized the humility that had always defined her. Dr. Mitchell stepped closer to Maria, speaking softly but still into the microphone's range. "There's no mistake, Maria. Would you like to see some of the nomination letters we received?" Before Maria could respond, Dr. Williams appeared beside the display board and began reading from a folder. "This letter is from the Gonzalez family. When our son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, we were overwhelmed and scared. Maria Santos spent 3 hours with us after her work shift, explaining everything the doctors had said in words we could understand. She came to our house the next day to teach us how to use the glucose meter and helped us create a meal plan that our son would actually eat. Without Maria, we would have been lost." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she remembered that terrifying day in the pediatric ward. Little Carlos Gonzalez had been so brave, but his parents had been paralyzed with fear and confusion. Maria had simply done what felt natural, staying to help a family in crisis. Dr. Williams continued reading. "This one is from Elena Chen. I was afraid to go to the hospital because I didn't speak English well and had no insurance. Maria Santos found me crying in the parking lot and sat with me for an hour, helping me fill out financial assistance forms and explaining my options. She even arranged for me to see a cardiologist who discovered I had a serious heart condition. Maria literally saved my life." More memories came flooding back. Mrs. Chen had been so frightened, clutching her chest and speaking in broken English about the pain that had been getting worse for weeks. Maria had recognized the signs and knew that fear and language barriers often prevented people from seeking help until it was too late. A third voice joined from the audience. Father Rodriguez stood up, holding his own letter. "May I add something?" he asked. Without waiting for permission, he continued. "Maria Santos has been the unofficial health advocate for our entire parish for years. When families are struggling with medical bills, they call Maria. When someone needs help understanding their medication, they call Maria. When elderly parishioners miss medical appointments because they don't have transportation, somehow Maria appears with her old Honda Civic to drive them." The room had gone completely silent now, everyone listening to this recitation of quiet heroism. Maria felt overwhelmed, not just by the recognition but by the realization that her individual acts of kindness had been part of something much larger. Dr. Mitchell took the microphone back, giving Maria a moment to compose herself. "Maria, we discovered that you've been doing the work of a community health advocate for years, but without the title, the salary, or the recognition. The hospital board, in partnership with several community organizations, has decided to correct this oversight." What happened next would later be described by everyone present as one of the most moving moments they had ever witnessed. Dr. Mitchell gestured toward the display board, which Maria hadn't been able to see clearly from the back of the room. As she turned to look, she gasped audibly. The board was covered with dozens of photographs showing Maria at work in the community. Maria translating at a community health fair. Maria helping an elderly man fill out medical forms. Maria reading to children in the pediatric ward. Maria organizing supplies for a disaster relief effort. Each photo was accompanied by a handwritten note of gratitude from someone she had helped. But it was the centerpiece of the display that took her breath away entirely. In the middle of the board was a bronze plaque that read, "Community Health, Advocate Wing, dedicated in honor of Maria Santos, whose selfless service has touched countless lives." "Maria," Dr. Mitchell announced, "the hospital board has voted unanimously to establish a new position, Director of Community Health Outreach. The position comes with full benefits, a salary commensurate with your experience and impact, and your own office in the new Community Health Wing that will bear your name." The room erupted in sustained applause, but Maria was staring at the plaque with her name on it. Her name, on a wall of honor. After 52 years of being invisible, overlooked, and undervalued, her contributions were literally being carved in bronze for future generations to see. Through her tears, Maria noticed Mrs. Henderson standing near the side of the room. Her supervisor's expression was complex, mixing surprise, embarrassment, and what might have been respect. Their eyes met across the room, and Mrs. Henderson gave a small nod that seemed to acknowledge everything that had passed between them over the years. Rosa and Miguel suddenly appeared at Maria's side, having been secretly invited to the ceremony by Dr. Williams. Both of her children were crying openly as they embraced their mother. "We're so proud of you, Mama," Rosa whispered. "But we're not surprised. We've always known who you really are." Miguel hugged her tightly. "You taught us that real worth isn't measured by titles or recognition, but by the lives you touch. Today, everyone else finally gets to see what we've always seen." As the ceremony continued with more testimonials and the formal presentation of the award, Maria felt something shifting inside her. For years, she had defined herself by other people's perceptions of her limitations. She had accepted being pushed to the sidelines, had believed that her contributions were too small to matter, had convinced herself that she wasn't qualified for bigger responsibilities. But standing there, surrounded by evidence of the lives she had touched and the impact she had made, Maria began to see herself through different eyes. She wasn't just a humble cleaning lady who had been lucky enough to help a few people. She was a community health advocate who had happened to support her family by cleaning floors. The recognition was wonderful, but the real revelation was personal. Maria Santos had always been exactly who she was meant to be. The only thing that had changed was that now everyone else could see it too. 6 months later, Maria sat in her new office in the Community Health Outreach Wing, reviewing applications for the hospital's expanded translator program. The office was modest but professional, with windows overlooking the courtyard where she used to take her lunch breaks. On the wall behind her desk hung the bronze plaque from her recognition ceremony, along with photos of families she had helped and certificates from various community organizations. The transition from cleaning lady to director of community health outreach hadn't been without challenges. Maria had to learn new computer systems, attend administrative meetings, and navigate hospital bureaucracy in ways she never had before. But for every moment of uncertainty, there were 10 moments of profound satisfaction as she realized how much more she could accomplish with official authority and resources. Her first major initiative had been the creation of a comprehensive community health education program conducted in both English and Spanish. Working with Dr. Williams and a team of volunteers, Maria had organized monthly workshops on topics ranging from diabetes management to childhood nutrition. The attendance at these sessions regularly exceeded the hospital's expectations, with families driving from neighboring towns to participate. The success of the education program had led to Maria's involvement in a much larger project. The city's public health department had approached the hospital about participating in a statewide initiative to reduce health disparities in immigrant communities. Maria found herself attending meetings with officials from the state capital, contributing to policy discussions and helping design programs that would be implemented across multiple counties. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in Maria's daily interactions with patients and families. No longer did she have to steal moments between cleaning duties to help people navigate the healthcare system. Now she had dedicated time to sit with families, explain procedures, translate for medical staff, and connect people with appropriate resources. One particular case had reinforced why her new role was so important. The Patel family had brought their teenage daughter to the emergency room after she collapsed at school. The parents spoke limited English and were terrified that they wouldn't be able to communicate their daughter's medical history effectively. Maria had spent 2 hours with the family, not only translating but helping them understand the treatment plan and follow-up care requirements. What struck Maria most was how different the experience was now that she had official authority. The medical staff consulted with her about cultural considerations, included her in treatment planning discussions, and respected her input in ways they never had when she was just the helpful cleaning lady who happened to speak Spanish. The recognition had also opened doors in the broader community. Maria had been invited to join the board of directors for 3 different nonprofit organizations. She was regularly asked to speak at community events, and her opinion was sought on health-related policy issues affecting immigrant populations. One evening, as Maria was preparing to leave her office, she received a phone call that brought her journey full circle. Mrs. Henderson, who had retired 2 months earlier, was calling to ask for Maria's help. Her own elderly mother, who spoke only Italian, was struggling to understand her treatment plan after a recent hospital stay. "Maria," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice humble in a way Maria had never heard before. "I know I wasn't always supportive of your ambitions, and I want you to know that I was wrong. Would you be willing to help my family?" The conversation was emotional for both women. Mrs. Henderson acknowledged that her resistance to Maria's advancement had been based on outdated assumptions and institutional biases she hadn't recognized at the time. Maria, characteristically gracious, focused on helping Mrs. Henderson's mother, rather than dwelling on past hurts. As Maria drove to Mrs. Henderson's house that evening, she reflected on how much had changed in her life. A year ago, she would have been nervous about visiting her former supervisor's home, uncertain about whether she belonged in that social circle. Now she felt confident in her ability to help, secure in her professional identity, and comfortable with her place in the community. The success of Maria's programs had caught the attention of healthcare administrators throughout the region. She had received job offers from larger hospitals in major cities, opportunities that would have seemed impossible just months earlier, but Maria had turned them all down, choosing to stay in the community where her roots were deep and where she could continue building on the relationships and trust she had developed over decades. The recognition had also brought unexpected personal fulfillment. Maria had enrolled in evening classes at the local university, working toward a bachelor's degree in public health administration. At 53, she was often the oldest student in her classes, but she found the academic work energizing and relevant to her daily responsibilities. Her children had watched their mother's transformation with pride and amazement. Rosa often brought her own students to hear Maria speak about community service and advocacy. Miguel had incorporated his mother's story into his social work practice, using her example to encourage his clients to recognize their own strengths and potential. But perhaps the most significant change was in how Maria saw herself. The woman who had once believed she was meant to work quietly in the shadows now understood that her quiet work had been preparing her for a much larger stage. She had learned that humility and leadership weren't contradictory qualities, that years of patient service could be the foundation for transformative impact. As Maria prepared for her next challenge, a statewide conference where she would present her community outreach model to healthcare administrators from across the region, she felt ready for whatever opportunities lay ahead. The humble woman who had been sent away from the firing line had discovered that sometimes the most powerful leadership comes from those who understand what it means to serve. 2 years after that life-changing recognition ceremony, Maria stood before the largest audience she had ever addressed. The National Healthcare Equity Conference had invited her to be the keynote speaker, an honor that still felt surreal. As she looked out at the auditorium filled with healthcare professionals, policymakers, and community advocates from across the country, Maria thought about the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. Her presentation, titled "The Power of Invisible Leadership," had become one of the most requested talks in healthcare circles. Maria's story resonated with audiences because it challenged fundamental assumptions about who qualified for leadership roles and how impact should be measured. Her message was simple but revolutionary. The most transformative leaders often emerge from the ranks of those who have been overlooked and undervalued. The statistics from Maria's programs at St. Mary's Hospital were impressive enough to command attention from healthcare administrators nationwide. Under her leadership, the hospital had seen a 40% increase in healthcare utilization among immigrant populations, a 60% reduction in emergency room visits for preventable conditions, and the highest patient satisfaction scores in the hospital's history. But the numbers only told part of the story. Maria's real impact was in the cultural shift she had created, both within the hospital and throughout the broader community. Her approach to healthcare outreach had become a model that was being implemented in hospitals across 15 states. The success had led to an unexpected opportunity. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention had offered Maria a position as National Director of Community Health Engagement, a newly created role that would allow her to influence healthcare policy at the federal level. The salary was substantial, the prestige significant, and the potential for impact enormous. Yet Maria had surprised everyone by turning down the position. During her keynote speech, she explained her reasoning to the confused audience of healthcare professionals who couldn't understand why anyone would walk away from such an opportunity. 3 years ago, I would have taken any recognition, any opportunity to advance because I believed that external validation was the only way to prove my worth, Maria said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. But I've learned that true leadership isn't about climbing ladders or accumulating titles. It's about staying connected to the communities you serve and remembering why you started this work in the first place. Maria had chosen instead to accept a different kind of challenge. She was launching the Maria Santos Community Health Institute, a non-profit organization dedicated to training community health advocates from immigrant and underserved populations. The institute would operate on a simple premise: the most effective health advocates are people who come from the communities they serve. The decision to start her own organization hadn't been made lightly. It meant giving up the security of her hospital position, taking financial risks, and stepping into the uncertain world of nonprofit leadership. But Maria had learned to trust her instincts and to bet on her own vision. The Institute's first cohort of trainees included a Somali refugee who had been working as a grocery store clerk, a former agricultural worker who had been organizing health education sessions for migrant families, and a Vietnamese grandmother who had been serving as an informal translator at community clinics. These were people whose qualifications couldn't be measured by traditional credentials, but whose potential Maria recognized immediately. Father Rodriguez had become the chairman of the Institute's board of directors, bringing with him a network of community partnerships that would be essential to the organization's success. Dr. Williams had taken a leave of absence from the hospital to serve as the Institute's medical director, drawn by the opportunity to help create a new model for community health advocacy. The recognition Maria had received over the past 2 years extended far beyond healthcare circles. She had been featured on the cover of a national magazine as one of America's unsung heroes. The governor had appointed her to the State Health Advisory Council. A documentary about her life and work was being produced by an independent filmmaker. But the recognition that meant the most to Maria came from an unexpected source. On the 2nd anniversary of her original award ceremony, the hospital had announced the establishment of the Maria Santos Scholarship Fund, providing educational support for hospital employees who wanted to advance their careers in healthcare. The first recipient was Carmen, a young woman from Maria's neighborhood who worked in the hospital kitchen and dreamed of becoming a nurse. At the scholarship presentation, Carmen had approached Maria with tears in her eyes. "You showed me that where you start doesn't determine where you can go," she said. "When I saw your name on that wall of honor, I realized that maybe someone like me could dream bigger too." This conversation reminded Maria why she had chosen to stay rooted in her community rather than accepting the federal position in Washington. Her impact wasn't just in the programs she created or the policies she influenced, but in the example she set for other people who had been told they weren't qualified for leadership roles. As Maria concluded her keynote speech, she shared the lesson that had become the foundation of her work. "I spent years believing that leadership was something that happened in boardrooms and corner offices, something that required advanced degrees and perfect credentials. But real leadership happens in hospital hallways at 3 a.m. when you hold a frightened mother's hand. It happens in parking lots when you help someone fill out insurance forms. It happens every time you choose to see the person in front of you as worthy of your time and attention." The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. As Maria left the stage, she was approached by dozens of healthcare workers who shared their own stories of feeling overlooked and undervalued. Many of them expressed interest in applying to the Community Health Institute, inspired by the possibility that their experiences and cultural knowledge could be transformed into professional opportunities. 6 months later, Maria received a phone call that brought her story full circle in the most unexpected way. The caller was Dr. James Morrison, the new chief administrator at a major medical center in Chicago. He had heard Maria speak at the national conference and wanted to discuss something important. "Ms. Santos," Dr. Morrison said, "we're opening a new community hospital in a predominantly Latino neighborhood, and we want to build it using your model from the ground up. But more than that, We want you to design our entire approach to community engagement. We're prepared to offer you complete autonomy and whatever resources you need." The offer was tempting, but Maria politely declined. She had learned that her greatest impact came not from accepting prestigious positions, but from staying true to her mission of developing other community leaders. Instead, Maria made a counter-proposal. The Chicago hospital could partner with the Maria Santos Community Health Institute to train their own community advocates. Maria would consult on the project, but the day-to-day leadership would come from people who lived in the neighborhoods the hospital would serve. This approach had become Maria's signature strategy. Rather than positioning herself as the indispensable expert, she focused on creating systems that could operate and thrive without her direct involvement. The Institute now had partnerships with 43 hospitals across 12 states, all implementing community health programs led by locally trained advocates. On a quiet Sunday morning, 3 years after that first recognition ceremony, Maria walked through the halls of St. Mary's Hospital where it all began. She was visiting Mrs. Chen, who had become like a second mother to her, and who was recovering from a minor surgery. As she walked past the wall where her plaque was displayed, Maria stopped to read the words that had once seemed impossible. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, was standing next to her, also reading the plaque. The child looked up at Maria with curious eyes and asked, "Do you know who Maria Santos is?" Maria smiled down at the little girl. "Yes, I do. She's someone who learned that being humble doesn't mean being invisible, and that the most important work often happens when no one is watching." "She must be very important to have her name on the wall," the child observed. "She's important," Maria agreed, "but not because her name is on a wall. She's important because she remembered that every person she met was important too." As Maria continued down the hallway toward Mrs. Chen's room, she reflected on how profoundly her life had changed, yet how fundamentally she had remained the same. She still arrived early, still stayed late when someone needed help, still believed that small acts of kindness could change the world. The difference was that now she understood the power of her example. Every day, through the Institute and her speaking engagements, Maria met people who had been dismissed, overlooked, or told they weren't qualified for leadership roles. Her story gave them permission to see themselves differently, to recognize that their experiences and insights were valuable, and to believe that they too could make a difference. The humble woman who had been sent away from the firing line had discovered something remarkable. Sometimes the greatest leadership comes not from fighting your way to the front, but from lifting others up so they can see how capable they truly are. Maria's name on the Wall of Honor had become more than recognition for past service. It had become an invitation for others to step into their own potential. And in hospital hallways, community centers, and neighborhood clinics across the country, that invitation was being accepted by countless individuals who were ready to transform their own quiet acts of service into powerful forces for change. Maria Santos had not just found her place in the spotlight. She had used that light to illuminate the path for others to follow.